Welcome back. Let's get into a spoiler-free movie review now. I want to talk about Devotion, which is a new movie out in theaters starring Jonathan Majors, and it is the inspirational true story of Jesse Brown, who was the first ever black aviator in the U.S. Navy. It's about all the hardships you could expect to go through breaking that barrier and his friendship with another aviator named Tom Hudner, played by Glen Powell. And yes, another movie about aviators just 6 months after one of the biggest of all time, Top Gun Maverick. So there will be some parallels here. I just kind of have to compare them when talking about two major movies about the same subject, also starring one of the people who was also in the other movie. So our aviator movie's back now. We'll talk about that too. But here's just a little bit of the Devotion trailer before we get into this full review.
The commanding officer called you one of the best pilots he's ever seen. It must be hard being the
naval aviator. It's the toughest job there is.
Did you ever think that you'd be in a squadron with a colored aviator?
Can't tell you how many times people have told me to give up, quit, die even. That's why you can't always do what you're told.
What do you want me to do?
Just be my wingman.
So this ended up being a pretty powerful movie, and I didn't really know the emotional roller coaster that you were going to go through from start to finish. And the interesting about this is I tend to like my war movies to be grittier. For example, Fury is one of my favorite war movies. It's very bloody. A lot of it is focused on the action. But this movie was nothing like that. It was almost like the actual war scenes were important, but they weren't the main focus. So it's a lot different than Top Gun Maverick in that regard. And really, it is a story about friends. It is a story about love. And it is a story about breaking down those barriers. Jesse Brown was the first black aviator in the Navy, and I think Jonathan Majors was the perfect person to play this Navy officer and tell his real-life story. All of the men in Jonathan Majors' family have actually served in the Army, so it was kind of cool to see him take on this role. And alongside him, you have Glen Powell, who was also in Top Gun Maverick. He plays another real-life pilot named Tom Hudner, and the story is all about their friendship and their heroic sacrifices that they made in the Korean War and how they went on to be two of the most celebrated wingmen in history. So there aren't very many Korean War movies. So for that reason, I think this movie is right up the alley of history buffs and also just aviation fanatics. And I love Jonathan Majors and Glen Powell's chemistry throughout this entire movie. They worked and paired very well together, and I think that is important because it is a lot more emotional than I was expecting. I think this is the most crying I've seen from characters in a war movie like this, which was really interesting to see, to show the weight of war and the weight of all these decisions that you make and how one little mistake can lead to some catastrophic results. And this movie was also beautifully shot. They used a lot of the same technology as Top Gun Maverick, so visually I think it's just fun to watch airplanes. Like, when it comes to movies like Top Gun, I'm not the biggest fan of that movie. But going into that movie, I was so intrigued by the technology they used of really putting these actors into those planes and flying them. And they did a lot of those same things in Devotion. The only real difference is Devotion didn't have the budget that Top Gun Maverick did. They didn't have the pool that Tom Cruise did to get those same kind of hookups to make a movie like that. But from what I've read online from big aviation fanatics, Devotion is actually a lot more historically correct, and they actually use real vintage planes that some of them were 80 years old. And I felt like the action in Top Gun Maverick was a lot more like a video game. It was very fast and high flying. It was a big summer blockbuster. You got to make a movie that looks like that. This one kind of had more of an Oscar-esque type movie feel to it. So a lot of the action in the airplanes wasn't as high-flying and intense, but it was more so that you were invested in these characters more so than you were in a movie like Top Gun. This movie is a bit of a slow burn, but the reason it is because you're getting to know the story of Jesse Brown. You're getting invested in his life and all these obstacles he has to go through. So there's a lot more substance in this movie. Because at the core of this movie, it is a drama. I guess I was going into it expecting more of just a straight-on war movie, and I was actually happy with having a drama like this because you have two really great actors here. I think if I was buying and investing in an actor like you would a stock, I would definitely invest in Jonathan Majors. He's going to be in the new Creed 3 movie. He's also going to be Kang the Conqueror, and he gave a really solid performance here. I don't think it's Oscar worthy. This movie doesn't quite get to that level, but it kind of feels like Oscar baity at times. And then you have Glen Powell, who I feel Hollywood is really trying to make him a thing right now. Very good looking guy, great actor. So I feel like we're going to see him in a lot more movies like this as a lead. I thought he was actually pretty good. So this was a movie I had low expectations for, and one of the main reasons is there's a Jonas brother in this movie, Joe Jonas. And sometimes I feel like whenever you put a musician like that in a movie, it feels like a cheap tactic to get all of their fans to come and watch them in this movie. But his brother has also been in an Aviator movie. But Joe Jonas actually did a pretty good job in this. It wasn't distracting, and that was all I guess I was looking for. And the other thing about this film is you don't have to be somebody who loves war movies. You don't have to be somebody who loves action movies to enjoy this movie, because I think Jesse Brown's story is very motivational, very powerful. There are some scenes in this movie that'll get you in the gut. I think if I had a soul and my heart wasn't made of stone, I probably would have found myself crying, at least at a couple parts in this movie. But like the soulless person I am, I just didn't quite get there. I do feel like this movie is in a little bit of a weird place. Like I said, it is not quite a Oscar-worthy film. I think the acting doesn't quite get there, even though the story is powerful. I don't think it's powerful enough to get that type of recognition, but it's also not like a full-on action movie like Top Gun. So I think it's one that people may overlook, but it's a pretty good, solid pick to go watch in theaters right now. I think seeing it on the big screen definitely adds another level to watching this movie. It didn't quite reach that IMAX scope that Top Gun Maverick did. I wasn't really expecting it to, but there were some very beautiful shots. And I love how this movie wrapped up and really went out on a high note and brought even the title all the way around together. I thought that was a really strong moment too. So if I had to rate Devotion, I would easily give it 4 out of 5 Aviator jackets. And now that I've watched 2 Aviator movies this year, I think I'm about ready to get my pilot's license.